So our last passage of tonight. So passage 3. So it says researchers have discovered that childhood exposure to secondhand smoke can have detrimental effects on a child's health and development. Studies have shown that secondhand smoke can 1. Increase adult incidence of asthma, 2. Decrease dopamine levels during adolescence, and 3. Affect cognitive processes like decision making, and 4. Increase adulthood incidence of cancer. To study the effect of secondhand smoke during childhood on adult health outcomes, researchers conducted a longitudinal study tracking 938 individuals who lived in homes from ages 0 to 10 with guardians who smoked at least 1 pack per day of cigarettes. As a control, researchers also recruited 912 individuals who lived in homes from ages 0 to 10 with guardians who did not smoke any cigarettes. Beginning at the age of 15 through the age of 60, the researchers sent a survey to the study participants to assess any physical or mental health conditions that the participants had, such as asthma, hypertension, diabetes, schizophrenia, depression, anger issues, or cancer. In the group that experienced secondhand smoke, researchers found a higher incidence of all 7 physical and mental health conditions. The greatest difference between the two groups was found in the incidence of asthma. 54% of the individuals in the group that experienced secondhand smoke developed some form of asthma by the age of 60, compared to 23% of the control group individuals. Researchers also found that individuals in the secondhand smoke condition developed schizophrenia by the age of 60 at a higher percentage than control group individuals. In a follow-up investigation, researchers decided to broaden the scope of the study to analyze socioeconomic factors. Using average household income and neighborhood public school funding as a proxy for socioeconomic status, researchers found that low socioeconomic status individuals had poorer health outcomes, irrespective of secondhand smoke during childhood. So, kind of similar to before, what does the first paragraph tell us?
Paragraph 1 says secondhand smoke leads to bad development.
So then the second question I have is, how were individuals grouped in the first experiment, and also what were the findings from their first experiment?
They were grouped in a longitudinal studies for the ones that were smokers versus ones that weren't smokers, based on age also, from a certain age group.
Yeah.
And what was the second part of the question?
And what were their major findings from it?
Yes, so the major finding was individuals that smoked, that lived in household that smoked, had a higher incidence of asthma, schizophrenia versus those that lived in household that did not smoke. And the other finding was they expanded the findings. Okay, that's it.
Yep.
The ones that smoked had higher poor health outcomes versus ones that lived in household where there were no smokers.
And last question. Now, they mentioned a second experiment. So what was the second experiment looking at, and what additional, I guess, factor did they add?
It was looking at SES based on,
Yep.
Like you said, the school funding and, how much monies the parents made, I guess those household made.
So now we're going to go to our first question. Okay, so we have 50% saying A and 50% saying D. So the answer is actually C. So I'll go into this. So the question asks, a researcher points out that there is a difference in the size of the secondhand smoke group and the control group, which would invalidate the results of the study. This concern is, so the researcher is saying that, the different sizes invalidates the results of the study. And the question is asking, is this particular researcher's point of view valid or invalid first? And so if we remember from the passage, I'm just going to go to the third passage. So if we remember from the passage, the secondhand smoke group, so that group with, that secondhand smoke group had 938 individuals, and then the control group had 912 individuals. So in terms of the number of individuals, that 938 and 912 are both really big numbers. And so having that little difference of it would be 25 individuals between the two groups would be a really small amount if you're thinking of like the 25 out of the 900 individuals. And so that's why first, like the researcher pointing this out, do we think it's valid or invalid? And when we're thinking about that small difference between it, it doesn't really seem valid. So that's why first you would think invalid, but obviously you also have to go through the rest of what the answer choices are saying here. And so there are two invalid options. And one of them is because a difference of 26, so this is slightly, anyway, 26 individuals for two large sample sizes will not be significant. And so that's kind of exactly the thought. I realized, was it 20? Sorry. Oh, so it was 912, not 913. So that's how you get the 26. But the 912 versus 938, that 26 individuals is really small. And in order to compare these two large sample sizes, that number wouldn't be like a significant amount of the total. So that's why C is the correct answer for this particular question. But let's look at the other answer choices. So D says invalid because statistical significance is not based on sample size. That is incorrect because statistical significance is definitely based on sample size, as we may know through like biology and through like the statistical significance tests, chi-square, t-tests. All of these, has that n value factor where, that can really influence what is considered a statistically significant difference between two groups. That's why D is incorrect. And for the two valid, so A and B, so for A, valid because the sample sizes must be equal in order to achieve statistical significance. And so I see here, it's ideal, like ideally in experiments, we want to have two sample sizes that are equal to compare them. But in this particular question and looking at the large amount of, individuals we have for the two groups, that small difference isn't too big in the large proportion of things, in which case that's why it's not valid, but also that sample sizes don't necessarily need to be exactly equal, just really relatively close in terms of the sample sizes. And then for B, it says valid because these unequal sample sizes will produce bias. And again, usually with so first of all, the difference is not too large and in terms of the proportion, and the unequal sample sizes, because the sample sizes are so big, the aim of the really big sample sizes are to eliminate bias. And so with these two groups being like of 900 individuals plus, they would most likely already be pretty good at decreasing the amount of bias. So that's why choice B is incorrect. Okay, so I have 100% saying A, and I'm very happy because the answer is A. So yeah, so the question just asks, which of the following most likely explains the increased incidence of schizophrenia in the secondhand smoke group? And let me just double check if the passage itself says anything about that. But yeah, so the passage already says in the second effect, decreased dopamine levels during adolescence. And this is, you know, this is something that you guys should definitely know for the MCAT Psych Soc section. But dopamine is like having a lower amount of dopamine is associated with schizophrenia, and so that's why A is the correct answer. For B, serotonin is related to depression. So if you have really low levels of serotonin, that's associated with factors of depression, but this question is asking specifically for schizophrenia. For acetylcholine and epinephrine, there aren't particular like mental conditions that or I guess conditions associated with psychology in particular that I am aware of. And so that's why for C and D, those are not the correct answer. Awesome. So next question. We've got 100% saying C. So definitely agree with you guys. The answer is C. And great way to end this lecture, might I say. But yeah, so the question asks, in a new study, researchers discover that individuals with low SES experience worse health outcomes than individuals with high SES. The result is best explained by which of the following? And so the answer is C, socioeconomic gradient of health, because that's associated with low SES experiencing worse health outcomes and high SES experiencing better health outcomes because of, tends to be multiple factors, the amount of money they can pay for these, health appointments and procedures, but also like the locations at which they live. So like we touched on in passage 1, the low SES individuals tend to be in areas with poor conditions, and so that also influences their health outcomes. And so that's why the answer is C. For B, food deserts, we went over that a little bit before, but not having availability for affordable and healthy food options tends to be associated with low SES areas. But for this particular question, we're focusing on the health outcomes. So that's not quite the answer for B. Gender inequality, that one is not related to the low SES individuals experiencing worse health outcomes. So that's why A is the incorrect answer. For D, epidemiology, that's like looking at the prevalence of diseases in different areas and communities. And so as this one is more focused on SES and health outcomes, that's why D is not the correct answer.